Welcome to another edition of Inquiring Minds. I'm your host, Steve Harper, and with me, as always, is the amazing Donna Carlin. Donna, how are you doing today?
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm fantastic. I'm kind of excited about today's topic. I say that every time because I'm excited every single time I get to talk to you. I learn so much, and I'm just having such a blast doing the show. So I'm anxious for us to dig in for today's topic.
I was thinking about this. There's so many facets to this, so we might go on for like 3 months. But in the meantime, the question that came to mind was, what lessons could be learned from multiple professions to be a better leader?
Oh, I love this. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting question because I don't think people actually look at this from this perspective. Who else in other industries who are maybe running other companies that are in non-competing spaces to you do you have in your network, and how do you build those relationships, and how do you learn from those people? Because people are successful in other industries, and you can learn so much from what they did to get to where they are, and maybe some of the key lessons learned that they've had over the years can be applied to your business and in your leadership style, or how you grow your customer base, or where the next great idea comes from.
That's it. And what it's also fascinating to see, famous leaders over time, they've been highlighted for their leadership in a specific organization.
Yeah.
Another question is, if they move to a different organization, would they have that much impact?
Mm.
Was it the chemistry of the organization? Was it the leadership? There's so many ways for us to look at this conversation. You could look at it from a sports perspective because you're so involved in sports. I could, well, other than hockey, and I don't play it, I just watch it. But from my perspective, my previous life playing in an orchestra, what it's like to work with a conductor and the multiple egos of conductors
Yeah.
and how their approaches are so different is also mind-boggling. And it brings loyalty. It brings the desire for you to do your best and be your best. And I think we have a lot to talk about today.
Yeah, I'm excited. You mentioned, and I sort of focused on professional, executives at your level or leaders at your level in other industries. But there's also lessons to be learned, like you said, from other environments. The arts, obviously, music, running and conducting an orchestra, the theater. How that process is run. Sports obviously provides us lots of lessons from that perspective. I think that a great engaged leader is trying to take whatever nuggets that they can pick up along the way from any area of those areas is really key. And I think that, at least in my relationships with a lot of the leaders that I work with, they never even think about it. They're so focused on their industry and so sort of myopic in terms of what's going on in their worlds. They fail to look beyond their little universes to know that, hey, there's things out here that I could learn from, and tips and ideas and strategies that I could potentially benefit if I'm just willing to open my eyes and kind of look.
It's really funny. I was at a conference years ago and I was downstairs looking for coffee at about 7 o'clock in the morning. And like, I really needed it intravenously at that point. But
Right there
anyway,
with you. Yes.
I hear this British accent, in my ear going, "What are you doing here?" It was one of the speakers, Ben Zander, who was going to be doing the opening keynote in his unique way. And I adored Ben.
Wow.
And from my previous life, as a musician, I started to smile and I said, I'm not here as a musician. I'm here as an executive coach. And, after I'm not going to go into his piece and what his leadership brought to the table, because it changed something from proficiently great that everybody saw. You would see these musicians performing. They're great. They're not horrible when they're on stage, to magical. That's the
Wow.
difference that he brought to the table. Like, I love Ben and
That's
everything
huge.
he does.
Yep.
And by the way, he wrote a book, The Art of Possibilities, which every leader should be reading, because that's what it's all about, is leadership. Anyway, to backtrack for a moment, I looked at Ben afterwards and I said, Why in the corporate environment or in most working environments do people think it's acceptable to say to their bosses, I need an extension, I'm not ready, I won't have my deliverable there in time? What would happen if that happened in an orchestral environment? He said you'd be out of a job.
Yeah.
Because if you don't get on stage and do your best, people aren't going to buy tickets and come to your concerts and hear you. And if you're not willing to put it all in so that you show up and you do your best, whatever that is, doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. Trust me, I've made many on stage. It means you're there to do your best and perform. Then you're not part of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And in a work environment, I think, great leaders strive to make that very clear, because if you don't honor your commitments, then the breakdown has a ripple effect
Yeah.
beyond your knowing. And it's a little bit more visible in an orchestra environment when you're there performing and somebody's just not able to do their part. I said to him, what makes it acceptable for the corporate environment, and what do you instill in your musicians so that they know it's not even an option, that
Yep.
they have honored their commitment to be on stage and do their best.
Yep.
There is something about what a conductor brings to the table that makes that a given, not an option. What could we learn from that to bring into the more corporate work, government, whatever it is, environment, to say if you take something on, you're going to commit to it. However, as a leader, if you're going to bombard your people with so much stuff that there's no way that they could do it and do it properly on time to the deadline that you set for them, you're setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
What could you adopt from that in order to learn from their way of being and their way of supporting the people that are going to be under their baton, so to speak?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I love that, because, it's what I hear from that is that as a leader, you have to show up and be prepared to be able to set the example for the people that are underneath you, right? And so there's a minimal level of deliverable and an expectation that should permeate the culture. But you have to look at the big picture as well. Like you said, coming to it from a perspective of, if I'm throwing too much on one department or, one, group, and that just not achievable in the timelines that we've set. You have to have the vision and the ability to be able to know, hey, when it's time to perform, are we going to be able to perform? And I think some of the lessons that you probably take from his talk that day, and ultimately the influence he had on you, is that to be able to understand the parameters by which you're working on and the deliverables by which we've committed to, but an understanding of all of the key pieces, the different musicians, the different sections, right? Is everybody going to be able to deliver on their part? And have I allowed or created an environment for success or something else?
That's it. And what I've seen, like in the sports world, and I would invite you to speak about that with a lot more experience, is that I'm going to use hockey because that's all I know. I've seen teams do anything for their coach. Absolutely, because they trust the coach implicitly and they respect the coach and the expertise that the coach brings to the table. Once they start losing that trust in the coach and don't feel the coach has their best interests at heart, it starts breaking down team dynamics. They're not performing, to their best ability. Yeah. And, the coach ultimately is let go because they've lost the confidence of the team. Where does that happen in a corporate environment? Because once you're at that level of leader, it's much more difficult in a corporate environment to replace that leader for various reasons. And until it breaks down to the point of no return, really, because
Yeah.
the employees aren't doing the work, they're not producing. The ripple effect is really detrimental.
Yeah.
What can they learn? And I'm going to bring back our previous conversation about co-creating with the people that work with them.
Yep.
So that they admit they don't have all the answers. They literally bring out the best in people, use the brilliance in the room in order to support, any action that has to be taken, and understand They are human beings behind what they're doing and have lives and issues and energy levels and everything else. What could you bring from other professions to help do that better?
Yeah, well, I mean, you mentioned sports. I mean, one of the the lessons that I have learned and I've seen, whether it be football or basketball or soccer or even baseball, there's a couple of things that that leader is really critical at doing, right? Is creating a
Right,
culture of winning and belief. And sometimes winning is not overnight. Sometimes it takes a long stretch of time for you to get a team that's not performing to perform, and you'll still lose, right? And you still have to feel good about the progress you made even with the losses. And winning is a culture that has to be cultivated from the top, but it has to permeate all the way down to the bottom and back up. And everyone picks one another up after a bad performance. Everyone, understands that they had a role in that loss. They also have a role in the win, but the loss doesn't immediately default to, well, I did my job, you didn't do your job. And the coaches specifically in a
yeah,
coaching team, if you will, like, that whole, structure, the head coach is always the one that gets it at the end of the day, but they're very similar to the CEO of the organization. And you see some companies, and there's been well-known corporate, stories that you can find in, articles where the CEO was very much just the figurehead, but didn't understand what was going on. The operations were struggling or departments were failing. And then, obviously, the stock prices drop or the board fires them, and they're not engaged, but they were in love with the position and the role for what the role, depicted. You see that in sports all the time, where you just have, coaches that are, letting everybody else run the team, and that doesn't help build that culture of winning or a culture of how to handle the losing when it's occurring. And I see that. So I see a lot of those situations. I also see a lot of times that you have coaches, just like executives, that play favorites, either around their direct reports or their managers or key departments that they have an affinity for. But they haven't taken the time to invest in any other relationships. They've got their superstars that they're paying, in sports, it's, millions of dollars, right? But, you sort of see the same thing in corporate, where there are those key performers and they get treated and run by a different set of rules. And that's allowed because that's kind of what the culture of the coaching is, coaching, from a professional sports team. And you can't have that, right? You have to have an organizational structure that allows you to, build the value of every key player, even those low performers, and help bring them up to make them better. And you partner those great superstar players with the players that are not superstars and try and figure out how to recreate that, that mojo, help them discover their contribution and how critical and valuable it is. And I like sports as it ties to an example for corporations, because you can see how many decisions, get made in the sports world that also are made in the corporate world. They're just not in the press as nearly as
yeah.
much. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of similarities in terms of how you run it, how you organize it, and what you can learn from it. And I would say if there was a leader watching or listening to our podcast, how would you be viewed if you had to go into the corporate press conference today and justify the decisions you're making? Or if somebody asks you, what's the culture like within your organization or your team? What would they say? Do you have disgruntled folks that are thinking that they're the cat's meow is the superstar player and they treat everybody accordingly? Or do you have an organization that's built around everybody lifting one another up, supporting each other in the losses, but also celebrating the wins when they occur? And how much of a role do you play in those things? And so I love it, because sports for me has always been a passion since I was little, but it's the greatest team dynamic, even in an organization, or excuse me, in a sport that is even, one-on-one, right? It's a singular sport like tennis. There's a whole
That's
team
right.
of people behind the scenes that are helping you be better and more successful. And organizations, I think, can learn a lot from these sports organizations and see what mistakes are being made, how people are handling the pressure of winning or losing, and ask themselves, okay, what can I take away from these experiences?
See, one of the things that I really miss because of COVID
Yeah.
is the fact that I was coaching my clients in real time in their
Yeah.
environments. So I could help them, I could literally recreate a moment in time in words and create pictures with those words to help them see how they handled something, how they interacted with somebody, what they did that was just so mind-boggling that they didn't even pay attention to because it was second nature to them.
Yeah.
And to be able to highlight that to such an extent to help them build an entire ecosystem around it. It's much harder to do it through video conferencing. It doesn't mean that we don't,
Yeah.
but I need to get them to give me the data that I need in order to witness everything that's going on. And what is amazing, that happens in sports, that happens in music. Just as I said, you could take somebody who's proficiently great. You don't get into an orchestra if you suck at playing your instrument. You're already, great. And the competitive nature is unbelievable. Even when I was in university, I had to audition every year to stay in the program.
Sure.
Never mind, what happened afterwards.
Yeah.
Because if you can't cut it in school, you're not going to cut it outside of school. The whole point is you need somebody to say, this is where you absolutely shine. Do what you're already doing well, become masterful at it. And this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm witnessing. Are you paying attention to it? How are you building on it? That's what you see in sports. These little nuanced changes really help, sports athletes be extraordinary at their craft.
Yep.
So, like in sports and in the corporate arena, the coach who's witnessing you helps clear the clutter of everything that's standing in your way for what we call superconductivity, like
Yep.
straight up.
Yeah.
Right? As well as add to the equation. When you did this, it was extraordinary. How can you apply this elsewhere? And then they start connecting the dots.
Yeah.
That's what this is all about in multiple people sports, not tennis or whatever. One relies on the other. It's a dance. So it's the coach being able to see all the players like on a chessboard and how they move and what their roles are. However, to allow the individual talents of that person continue to grow and shine.
Yeah.
So, if you apply that, that's one thing. In tennis, I tell people, what's your tennis ball? What are you so focused on that everything else disappears? You need to pay attention to everything else as well.
Yeah.
However, a corporate leadership is like tennis. It's a dance.
Yep.
You're moving, the ball is moving, the racket is moving, the other player is lobbing things at you on a regular basis. And to have that dance of being able to connect and push back or whatever it is you have to do is a great lesson to learn from a tennis coach.
Yeah.
To watch the dance of what tennis is in itself and how it applies in a corporate environment.
Yeah. Well, so we talked about the orchestra and we've talked about sports. The one thing I want to make sure that everybody walks away with is what other, what other similar organizations or leaders in similar roles to the one that you have in other industries can you learn from? Because I think there are lessons to be learned in all of these key areas. What I have found is the diversity of folks that I've attracted to my network that, I run a software company and, in addition to everything else I do. And I recognize that there is a whole lot that I don't know. And there's a whole lot about building and growing this type of business and this type of revenue stream that is completely foreign to me. But I see similarities in other industries. And so I started reaching out to other executives, other CEOs and saying, look, I'd like to learn from you. I'd like to, hear your story. I'd like to see why you've been successful. And I'd like to see if I can, draft off some of this great mojo that you have. And almost everybody has been open to it because very rarely does anybody say, hold on a sec, you have something I want and you have something I think I can learn from and I can benefit from. And I find that when you do that and you're open and there's no competitive threat a lot of times, people are a lot more open to sharing and having these conversations with you because anybody that has been successful is excited for somebody to recognize that they've been successful and they'd love to tell you that story. And so those things I find are incredibly valuable. So it's looking at, all of these things and combined and saying, where can I learn how to become a more effective leader? How do I grow a better business? How do I do what some of these other individuals are doing? And, how can I apply some of that great mojo that they have to what I'm working on?
Also look at their people.
Yeah.
So if you see an organization that looks like it's doing really, really well, in addition to speaking to the leader, the CEO, whatever it is, to learn from them,
Yes.
ask the people that are thriving under them, what about their leader really enables them to be this good?
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to find out not from the leader's perspective of what they're giving, you're finding out from their people's perspective what they're learning, what they're being able to do, how they're ramping up in their careers because of the leader.
Yep.
That's going to give you the most amazing data to work from.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, this is, I think the key thing, the key takeaway that we want anyone to walk away from this episode is look beyond your current environment and look at the lessons you can learn from all these other environments that really do have lessons to teach, and start having conversations, start engaging other folks that have already been there, done that in their industry or in their professional sports organizations, or like Donna said, in the orchestra or in the arts. These are folks that are going to learn. They're willing to share, but they could also be learning a lot from you as well. So it can be a very useful exchange. And it's the diversity of your connections that I think really bring the value to your network. And I have found, at least personally for myself and for many clients that I've really coached to do this, it just opens up a whole new world. And that's kind of the fun thing. It kind of reinvigorates what you're doing. It kind of ignites that passion and that flame, because you're picking up some of these great ideas and great thoughts, and now being able to apply them to what you're working on and what you're focused on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of my favorite TEDsters before,
I
like
love
we
that
end
word.
this, her name is Margaret Heffernan, and she did a talk on the pecking order at work and about the superstars, the high potentials, all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's an invaluable talk to listen to as a leader, because her perspective, she's an amazing leader in her own right, and her perspective is unbelievable. I really invite you to listen to that talk and see what you get out of it.
Yeah, I'm writing it down now. And how do you spell her last name, just so those that are listening? Margaret.
Hefffernan, Heffernan.
All right. I'm going to look for that. We'll also put a link in the show notes to this one as well, because I think that's a great recommendation. Well, like always, we could talk forever and ever. And, these things just, I learned so much through our conversations, and this might be another one, based on listener or viewer feedback. We'd love to hear what you picked out of this, or have you had experiences, tapping the great ideas of another leader, and how did that work, and how did you approach it? We'd love to continue this conversation offline. Donna, how could they do that? And ultimately, how can someone suggest maybe other topics they'd like us to have a conversation in the future about?
Get us on our website. Steve could be found at ripplecentral.com. I'm at Donna Carlin with a K.com. And you could write us an email through there, get to our social media links from there. Great way to connect with us. As well, our Facebook group, Inquiring Minds with Donna Carlin and Steve Harper. Tell us what you think. Give us, share your stories with us. Give us some ideas as to what you want to hear us discuss. We would love to engage with you.
Absolutely. And I want to thank, on behalf of Donna and myself, everybody that has given us feedback so far and has said they're taking so much away from this show. It's really interesting to see where people are tuning in. We've got a wide variety of folks that are listening on our podcast. We're now available on almost every podcast platform that wherever your little ears want to take you, you'll find us generally, Inquiring Minds. But like Donna said, whether you're engaging with us on Facebook when we broadcast or show these videos, or on our YouTube channel, we are so grateful for wherever or however you got here. And as our audience grows, we're having more engaged and fun conversations, and we're just having a blast doing this. And we're so grateful that you've tuned into Inquiring Minds, and we look forward to coming back again very soon with another interesting conversation. Yeah,
No
Donna,
worries.
I hope you have a fantastic day.
You too.
All right,
Speak
take
soon.
care.